Good morning. I'm Jim Perkins, and I welcome you to the sixth and last presentation in the Spring 2013 OLLI Program Series, Foreign Cultures and American Foreign Policy. The objective of this OLLI program is to inform participants about foreign cultures and how they affect those countries' behavior, and how that knowledge can create an enlightened American foreign policy. Today's presentation is by Majida Bargach. The title is Myth and Reality of Moroccan Exceptionality During the Arab Spring. And a reminder that we will have the Q&A session as usual over here on my right, your left, and please stand up close to the microphone so that we can get the question out and the audience can hear it. Majida Bargach was born and raised in Morocco. She was born in Casablanca, where her father served as the first governor of Casablanca after Morocco achieved independence in 1956. The youngest of 8 children, she grew up in a multicultural household in the capital city of Rabat, where the family moved when she was still a toddler. I learned Arabic and French at the same time, Bargach said, recalling her childhood. She also speaks Spanish, a Berber dialect or two, and now English. That's 5 languages if you count them. Surrounded by those who were both Muslim and Christian, European and African, well-off and very poor, educated and illiterate, Bargach became not only comfortable but excited by cultural diversity. The heterogeneity that surrounded her as a young girl continues to inspire her and her desire to build bridges between people of different cultures. Bargach learned much about building bridges from her father, who served as Minister of Islamic Affairs in the government of Mohammed V and Hassan II, who were Morocco's kings during and after independence. He also had been Minister of Habus and Islamic Affairs. As such, her father received dignitaries from all over the Muslim world and Europe, and his daughter met many of them. After completing high school in Morocco, Bargach was educated at the University of Bordeaux, Montesquieu. Living in France for many years, she earned an undergraduate degree in law and economics and studied political science and international relations as a graduate student. Bargach is a board member of the Tangier American Legation Institute for Moroccan Studies, and she is currently working on American soft diplomacy in North Africa. There at the University of Bordeaux in 1987, Bargach took a class on American politics taught by a visiting professor from the University of Virginia. She struck up a friendship with James Caesar and his wife Blair French and kept in touch with them even after they returned to America and she returned to Morocco, married and started a family. Bargach immigrated with her family to the U.S. in the summer of 2000. It was then that Professor Caesar, now the Harry R. Byrd Jr. Professor in the UVA Department of Politics, was instrumental in Bargach coming to Charlottesville and to UVA. In the spring of 2001, she started teaching at UVA, both in French and Arabic, before accepting a full-time lectureship position at the French department. And I might note that she lectures and teaches, and she does this in English, which she did not know until she came to this country in 2000. While she loves the classes she teaches on the literature and politics of Morocco and North Africa, Bargach is most excited about showing students her homeland. So in 2001, when Professor Bill Quant, who's spoken to you here, then UVA's Vice Provost for International Affairs, suggested she create a study abroad program in Morocco, she jumped at the chance to merge her own interests in international relations with the university's mission to create a globally aware, culturally diverse educational environment for students. And in 2002, she started the UVA Study Abroad program in Morocco. She was hired in June 2009 as Associate Director of the Center for International Studies, and in February 2012 was appointed as the Interim Director. In the summer of 2009, she served as the Interport Lecturer with the Semester at Sea program, and there were tours from Alexandria, Egypt to Casablanca, and in Morocco in 2012 from Istanbul to Casablanca, and in 2013 from Accra to Casablanca, and she just returned from this trip last week. Among her many awards are the Meade Endowment Teaching Award for 2007-2008 from the University of Virginia, the Study Abroad Teaching Award from UVA in 2009, the Seven Society Faculty Award in 2010 from UVA, and just this March, 2013, Majida was awarded the Extraordinary Achievement Award in Education, given by the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee Women's Initiative in honor of International Women's Day. This initiative is a national consortium of American Arab women formed in 2011 to support the Anti-Discrimination Committee's role in advocating in the areas of civil rights, mutual understanding, and cultural heritage preservation. Please welcome a very interesting and active Majida Bargach.
So well done, so humbling, true, but very much generous. Thank you. Good morning. I very much hesitated about the title of this presentation, and more especially about the Arab Spring. Arab Spring. Although I will use the term, I'm not the only one to dislike this Arab Spring. We are a bunch of. I don't like it for several reasons. It was not a new book that was in my father's bookshelves 30 years ago that was called Un Printemps Arabe. It was published in 1959, and the author was Jacques Benoît Méchain. Un Printemps Arabe means an Arab Spring. So the spring and the Arabs were linked since a long time, apparently. Beyond the word, I see mountains of cliches. One of them is a colonial one. These young countries, I've heard that many times, these young countries, spring is symbol of young things, of course. These countries are not young, although the majority of the population is young. But unless you look at it from a very paternalistic, colonialist viewpoint, the countries are old. Another theme that we've heard during the Arab Spring is, I think it was from people that disliked the terms Arab Springs. They talked about the awakening of Arab countries that I dislike too. If it's like we're talking about sleeping beauties, they're finally waking up. A good friend of mine that I love and totally disagree with her, and we deadly fight about politics. Maybe that's the reason why I love her and she loves me. She said to me, they finally, she said, this is the first time I look at these masses of young Arabs with empathy. They want democracy. They understood the values of democracy. Well, this idea is totally in contradiction with all the things that we had heard before about Arab countries. We heard about violations of human rights in these Arab countries. It was about political rights. The people in jail, some of them were there because they were fighting for their rights. They knew what democracy was, they wanted it, but the West was silent, and we will go back to this point. So, back to the title of the presentation, Exceptionality. I hesitated also between exceptionalism and exceptionality. It looks like exceptionalism is about America. So let's say exceptionality. This is an image that Morocco claims from time to time. It's an assumption that you also can hear outside of Morocco. It was when I was studying in France that I first heard the idea You Moroccans are different. It was said with a very positive tone. I always gratefully accepted the compliment, but questioned the giver. Why do you think Moroccans are different? Or how do you think Morocco is different? The responses were sometimes evasive, but never satisfying, and till I had other elements that were added. Moroccans are different even physically, I've been told. And I also been told I can easily recognize an Algerian from a Moroccan, from a Tunisian. I said, wow, really? I can't. I certainly can if I hear them speaking Arabic, and depending on their accent, I will say he's Algerian, he's Tunisian, he's Syrian, but not before. The closest people to Moroccans ethnically, culturally, are Algerians and vice versa. I heard this enough to understand that French really thought Moroccans were different from Algerians. In fact, it was only through the post-colonial thoughts of mainstream French. Morocco was an exception because different from Algeria, with whom the relations were more complex. As you know, the decolonization war of Algeria left a great trauma and a negative image of the Algerian in France. Therefore, this difference and exceptionality look to me as a post-colonial fantasy, but in the recent years, Morocco started also branding itself with the same fantasy that I always try to understand. During the so-called Arab Spring, the exceptionality of Morocco resurfaced from inside and outside the country. After the fall of the Tunisian regime, followed by the Egyptian regime, the who's next was the question in the Arab streets. But after the disenchantment about the Arab Spring, after the Arab Spring became, as some Arab intellectuals called it, the Islamist winter in Egypt and Tunisia. And I have just to say something about the word Islamist. The way it is used in North Africa and in the Francophone sphere, it's Islamists means fundamentalist Muslim. Otherwise, I would say Muslim, not Islamist. And I know the meaning is different here. So after that, the question of the exceptionality of Morocco resurfaced. French scholars Charles Saint-Pro and Frédéric Rouvillois edited a collective book, this time is a recent one, written by French and Moroccan scholars entitled L'Exception Marocaine, the exceptional Morocco, or published in March 2013. I will examine their points and others later. But now, the first point, I would like to argue that Morocco is not exceptional. Why? Because it suffers from many diseases that led to the Arab Spring in Tunisia, who started these revolutions in 2010, and other Arab countries that followed. Morocco has a very large portion of unemployed people, and especially among the young people. The numbers for unemployment are difficult to get. According to Moroccan authorities, the unemployment is 9% of the active population. But without being necessarily skeptical towards the official numbers, which is something, a common sport, being suspicious about what is said in the TV or what you read in the press. But I would say that it's very difficult to define what is unemployment in a developing country. So many people are undeclared workers. You cannot count, you cannot know who is working or not, just simply not declared. Or living with this informal sector, informal small businesses. The numbers anyway are big. most certainly bigger than the official numbers, and no doubt for me, this is the reason, one of the major reasons of the Arab revolutions. Young people without future. The main cause of the unemployment is the failure of educational system. Morocco suffers from the worst illiteracy rate, as half of Moroccans, more or less, half of Moroccans are illiterate. At the independence date, in 1959, when French left Morocco, the illiteracy rate was 90%, 90%, talking about la mission civilisatrice. It was quite a failure in this way. But I'm not only blaming the colonization. The years that followed the independence, the education was not the priority as it should have been. Unemployment, education, health system is also extremely weak, although the budget allocated to it is decent and in permanent increase, 4% this year. The weakness of the health system is largely due to another social evil, corruption. Although corruption is not only present in developing countries, it badly affects the people at the lowest level. For decades after the independence, this is another reason, and more precisely till the 90s, Moroccans were solely dependent on the government subsidiaries to help developing the country. The civil society could not organize in NGOs or any type of association to help alleviate poverty and advance development issues. Remember, it was the Cold War. So any association before the 90s, it was very difficult to start one. It was very difficult for any reason because it was suspected to be leftist or subversive or having another agenda and political communist maybe agenda. So the main goal was to keep Morocco safe and at the right place. Security was the key issue during Hassan II's reign, the father of the actual king, and maintaining Morocco far from Russian influence was the goal of America and the Allies during the Cold War. Morocco needed to stay with the West, fighting the communist regime and certainly not becoming one of them. Finally, Morocco is not exceptional because it had also demonstrations and protests happening during the Arab Spring. But they were not new to Morocco. They were there since 20 years before the Arab Spring. Demonstrations, especially protests from non-employed and employed people, were in front of the parliament since years. It was known to Morocco. So Morocco was not exceptional because it was under the same conditions as other countries that rebelled against their regimes, but it resisted so far to these revolution waves. Morocco must have something that differentiated from others. So what makes Morocco different, if not exceptional? One of the main assets of Morocco that sometimes my students have a hard time to understand. My American students, I take to Morocco, as you heard. So one of the main assets of Morocco is its millennium monarchy, that is one of the bases of Moroccan identity and traditions, but also the force behind reform and progress. So when my students doubt a little bit, and I say to them, just go on the streets, talk to people, and see if there is really a support or not. Try to understand. It's different from what you believe, but try to look through it. The monarchy the system, the monarchy, has the time with it, and it balances the excess, the violence, and the temptation of the unknown that tempted desperate countries. In the book I mentioned earlier, Frédéric Rouvillois, professor of law, something is ringing, here we are, professor of law at René Descartes, University René Descartes in Paris, highlights the reforms that took place since Mohammed V, the actual king, since he became king in 1999. The king, bent on reform, pursued three complementary plans. First of all, just before being king, when he was a crown prince, he started building his reputation and he started winning the confidence of Moroccans. He was called the prince of poor people. He started big NGOs and associations working for handicapped people, and he was known as probably different. So the three plans that he pursued were strengthening the democratic process and strengthening the liberties, the modernization of the government, and big social and economic projects. When the revolution started in North Africa, the king was quick to react, announcing on March 11th the reform of the constitution as well as new parliamentary elections. A referendum has been organized for the new constitution in July 2011. Moroccan voted massively for the constitution, although I suspect many of them did not even read it. But it was sort of a renewal of their confidence towards the king. Many Moroccans were terrified by what was going on in other countries because they thought it would be unrest, it would be violent, it would be long to achieve. So this vote for the constitution was like a vote of confidence towards the king. Despite the weakness and the weaknesses of the system, and there are many, and especially corruption, even in the circles that are close to the top, is there. And Morocco is working on it, not as fast as I wish. But despite all of that, the majority of Moroccans are behind the king, including the traditional parties of the left, and including the Islamist party. So in November of the same year, the parliamentary elections were held. The PJD, Party of Justice and Development, the Islamist party, won the plurality with 27% of the vote. And these people had never been in power. Following the constitution, the Prime Minister, Abdelilah Ben Kiran, was chosen from the PJD party, the Islamist party. A coalition was formed with other traditional parties. It's a multi-party system. So others joined the coalition, like the Istiqlal party, the party of the independence, that is kind of center-right party. The PPS, the former Communist Party, joined the coalition too. And so it's a coalition of several parties, but the PJD is the dominant one. The actual government is playing the game without major changes, following the rules set before, where the king is still in control of the political game. And the PJD accepted to play this rule in the government. However, with the 2011 constitution, the prime minister gets more power, and certainly the one to nominate top positions in the administration. I think it's sort of interference between the two mics. Is it okay? Yeah, so it goes and come back. So some tensions occurred and will occur again because of the agenda of the Islamist party. Most of them were attempts to limit certain liberties existing in Morocco. For example, the PJD wanted to limit the French programs in the public channels, TV public channel, thinking that French was still too present in the audiovisual, in the medias. Most of these two public channels were kind of bilingual. You have the news in Arabic followed by the news in French, and then eventually with Berber, etc. But Arabic was the agenda of the PJD, you know, dominant. So it didn't work. They also intended to to add some restrictions to the sale of alcoholic beverages in certain hotels, places, in the main supermarket, to separate them from the main, you know, some attempts that did not work. But secular Muslims are afraid of this new Islamic ideology that we also call political Islam. I have several books I can give you the titles of that are very interested in this way. This is, for many Arab moderate Muslim intellectuals, I don't know how to call them, they think that the phenomenon is not very well understood in America. Morocco has always been a Muslim country, no doubt, and Islam is the religion of the state. It's not a secular country. The religion is religion of the state, but Islam is moderate in Morocco, tolerant, open since decades. Women's rights, I think, are the best way to measure freedom in any Muslim country. And women's rights in Morocco made a huge progress in the recent years. The society was quite advanced in this way. Women were able to study whatever they wanted, to be doctors, pilots, political figures, but the law was far behind. So in 2004, a new family law was brought with a major change in terms of gender equality. It's not perfect, but secular Muslim or moderate Muslims and/or are concerned about an eventual regression of liberties in this domain, as well as other matters of freedom. In Morocco, secular and/or moderate Muslims in Morocco want the religion, the power, the religious power to stay in the hands of the king, because he appears to be the protector of the moderate Islam as it happened since a long time. This is happening, what is happening right now in Tunisia and in Egypt is worrisome. The perspective of an Islamist regime is terrifying for those who grow up in a moderate and tolerant Islam, different from what we see today. And we can talk about it for a longer time, if you will. It is different in many ways. It is less open than it used to be. So when we hear, oh, they're going back to their tradition, it's not going back to the tradition. It's going back to something that we did not grow up in. It's with new rules, new interpretation of Islam. This is one of the reasons why the monarchy in Morocco continues to get support. I heard saying that Muslims are back to their traditions. I said that before, but it has nothing to do with the Islam I grew up in. I would like to conclude, probably to give more room to questions, and I know that you have some. I would conclude with the hope that the reforms in Morocco will continue and accelerate in order to confirm the exceptionality the country claims for itself. The education, the justice system, the fight against poverty and corruption continue making progress as they did in the last decade. Morocco will prove that the spring can happen without revolution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Majida. That brings up several questions, and maybe I can form at least one or two. There is still a monarchy. The king, is it Mohammed VI that's there now?
Correct.
You said that the religious power belongs through him. So when America forms its foreign policy, when the State Department visits Morocco, how do they treat, who do they go to? Do they go to the parliament, to the prime minister? Do they go to the king? Do they go to both? How do they sort of understand what where the power lies or where they need to exert their influence?
Well, depends who is visiting.
Oh, does it? Okay.
You have people from the Congress visiting parliament members, that's for sure. Very often, though. I think they certainly visit the king and the prime minister. But for now, and kind of following the French model, foreign policy is still the prerogative of the king.
Is there a conflict, I guess, between Parliament and the monarchy in terms of issues that come up for education or equal rights? And another part of that would be, what role of influence do the women have in Morocco?
I think conflict will be, and I hope conflict will be. I think, I'm a little bit concerned, and I'm not the only one to be, about what an Islamist party with influence can do in terms of education. So we see yet some tensions, and I think it will continue. About women, the government before this one, 7 women were in the first circle of the government as ministers. In this one, only 1. And I will tell you several anecdotes about that. That doesn't look very good. Yeah. I mean, and this woman, this minister, who seems to be smart, is in charge of social affairs and women condition. It's not a big portefeuille, as we say. So yes, it is worrisome. The role of women, at least in politics.
Thank you for your comments. Of the Muslim countries that I have visited, it seems to me that the women in Morocco have more freedom and a more liberal expression to express their wills than in the other countries. Unless I've been hoodwinked, would you agree with that? And if so, what has contributed to that difference it's developed in Morocco?
Thank you for your question. I am fan of Moroccan women, which is the biggest bias. When I travel with my students, I see women from all social levels, from all places in Morocco. We go to very remote villages. Women work so hard, so hard. I don't think Morocco is an exception. Algerian women worked very hard towards even the independence of Algeria. They were very present. They were chased from the power as soon as Algeria got its independence, but they contributed politically, physically. It was just incredible. I think Tunisian women did very well. They were helped also by the President Bourguiba, who was the first leader after the independence of Tunisia, the same year as Morocco, 1956, who gave them an amazing margin of freedom and equality. that we are now very afraid to see disappearing. So why Moroccan women look today maybe stronger because it's a peaceful and balanced country so far, but I am concerned about what I'm seeing today. You know, certain groups of fundamentalists present the true or present themselves as the only owners of the true, not presenting the true with all the facets of it and all the differences. So non-educated women are starting buying this. You know, if you don't know the text, if you're not raised in a very in a spirit of criticizing, analyzing the text, you may think that there is only one true or one way to read the Quran. So far, Moroccan women are doing great. They are present everywhere. So much that maybe it scared some males around. Females that were confined at the very beginning to their houses, and especially, incredibly, in certain areas during the French protectorate, where the situation of women was not great at all. So they were confined at home, and then they have now the other space, which is outside of the home. So they are inside and outside. And men may be threatened sometimes because they are really, really very powerful. I expose my students to different categories of women, including truly fighters, champions of women's rights and human rights in general. I could name one, Latifa Jbabdi, who was in the past a political prisoner as extreme left activist in Morocco in the 70s. She went twice to jail. I mean, this is really a role model for lots of young people in Morocco. So yes, Moroccan women are advanced. Yes, they are doing great, but careful.
Can you comment on the role of Western investment in Morocco? It's nicely placed geographically. It has a window on the Mediterranean and a window on the Atlantic. And what strikes one visiting there that there is a very close connection between the openness of Morocco and the fact that people, let's say, England and elsewhere have chosen to invest there and see the second homes and so forth. What role does that play in making Morocco different from its neighbors?
Yes, thank you. I don't want to mimic a female politician, American female politician, but I truly can see Spain from my window when I am in Tangier. It's 9 miles, the Strait of Gibraltar at its small, it's 9 miles from Europe. So I think it counts. It's important. Well, a country was plays a major role. Lots of investments are made since this decade in Morocco. There is a huge project called Tangier, the big port in Tangier, and with the idea of making Tangier again an offshore zone, an international zone, strategically placed. Tangier has 2 seas, one the Mediterranean in one side and the Atlantic in the other side. You can see both from your window too. I am very excited about that because the only thing I worry about is employment of young people. So it's great. It's fantastic. Many investments in terms of tourism. We see American companies as Jacobs being involved in Morocco, etc., etc. We see Morocco signed in 2004 a free trade agreement with the US, and this is very important. At the same time, it was signing a free trade agreement with Europe, And I think Europeans were not very happy to see Morocco signing the free trade agreement with the US, but it went. So, you know, now I'm a little bit concerned about that too, you know, about people coming, living in Morocco. Morocco is very open right now, very open. From the north, Europeans are coming. Lots of French bought secondary houses or primary houses or retired in Morocco. City of Marrakesh is just incredibly French again. From the south, poor, young, sub-Saharan African people are coming. And it's constant. So open from the south, open from the north. I don't know, sociologically speaking, what it's going to be in a few years. So far it's interesting. Morocco, I wanted to bring to you, maybe I can forward to you a map that was in the Washington Post on March 24th, I believe. And I have it with me on my computer, about the openness of countries. So it was from the dark blue, very open, to the very red, totally not open and not welcoming. So Morocco was placed among the 3 best countries in terms of welcoming and openness to foreigners. And after, I think, Iceland, New Zealand, and Morocco was the 3rd. You'd be surprised to see this map. It's interesting. So I'll leave it with you. But, you know, seeing the xenophobia that happens sometimes in Europe towards foreigners, I think that Morocco is doing great. But how long? You know, how come that Europeans can come to Morocco? Joe the plumber, the French Joe the plumber, can go to Morocco and start his business. But Moroccans cannot go without a very challenging visa to get. So there is some things that are a little bit unequal, but this is the price of the welcoming.
Hi, Majida. I just spoke with someone that came off the 100-day semester at sea, and their favorite port or time was in Rabat and Fez. Wondered if you might give us a little glimpse of how the U.S. is viewed by young people in Morocco, and particularly in light of the events, the spring, for what we did or didn't do, or the role of the Hillary Clinton State Department. And is there anything you might share that would light that up a little bit, with the huge bulk of population being so young in most all countries in the Middle East?
So you have 3
perception of the U.S.
Yeah. I think for a while Americans were not very known of the general population. So I remember the first study abroad program I led to Morocco in 2002. I've had a briefing with the faculty that I hired there in Morocco, Moroccans, professors. And I said, you know, this is another teaching style, just be yourself, you know, the students will behave. I was afraid that they will scare our students with very, you know, structured French type of education. So I said, you know, just be yourself, they will love you, and you know, don't worry about discipline. Our students are serious and dedicated to what they study. So 6 weeks later, I was debriefing with the faculty. They said, oh my God, they are fantastic. They could not believe. I think in general what I've seen is Moroccans think that Americans are very approachable, very respectful. They have seen other behaviors coming from the north. So I think the image is very positive, though they did not agree with American foreign policies sometimes, and very much disagree. So we've had a student, an American student who was spending a semester in Morocco, And his parents, so it was the beginning of the war in Iraq that was not supported in Morocco, neither in the US in many ways. His parents were very concerned. He was American and Jew, and it was sensitive time. And so we wrote to him, and he answered back saying, "The only thing I've heard, I went to the hairdresser, and the hairdresser said to him, 'You're a nice guy. I'm not going to give you the haircut of George Bush.'" It was not very bad. It was not bad. So I think people differentiate, how they appreciate the population or the people they see and the foreign policy. Well, there was also the Obama discourse made in Cairo, 2009, I believe, was so appreciated among Arabs in general. The Arab world was raving. It was the best example of soft diplomacy, the best example of reaching and bridging the culture, recognizing so many things, recognizing the fact that Morocco was the first country to recognize United States of America after its independence. So the first friend of America since 1777. So all this discourse was absolutely so, and after that, they believed nothing very much happened after this promising discourse.
Majida, your presentation brings up several questions. One, if you mentioned that if there was a congressman going to Morocco, that they would go and visit the parliament. If our Secretary of State were to visit there, would he visit the king and the parliament, or just one, or?
The king and the prime minister.
Uh-huh. And does the...
and the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Oh, yes, of course.
Very much so,
yes.
Who is also from the PGD party.
One of the things that came up in our conversation that we had previously was your observation about the dress of the Arab women. I don't know whether hijab or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
Hijab.
Well,
yes, I got it backwards.
Several types.
Yes, but it seems like that Morocco is more open and more, I don't know whether it's Western or what, in both dress and culture and things. Does this trend toward the hijab reflect on what's growing from the trends of what's going on with the Muslims as they more influence all of those countries, as influence Morocco? Because your observation was really something that I hadn't seen before about the difference between the women's garb. Am I not clear?
You are very clear. I'm not clear about it.
No.
Well, I'm clear, but a little bit bitter about this issue. So, first of all, the Morocco I grew up in, there was no hijab among young women whatsoever. So the generation of our mothers were veiled, and most of the time during colonization they were, or protectorate I would say, they were home. They did not have many opportunity to wear it outside, but they were. So it was a battle to remove this veil. That was different from what we see. It doesn't exist anymore. I mean, there were specific ones, and in Rabat, what was the outfit for outside the house disappeared. What we see today is something that happened in Morocco in the mid-80s, late 80s it started. It was not there before. What was there before was several ways to cover your head. Men and women in the past, including in Europe, were head covered. And then the men discovered their, in France, in World War II, for a man, walking without a head cover was seen as vulgar. And suddenly only women and only Muslim women are now covered. So the hijab you are talking about, the one we see in, I'm not talking about the burqa that is the full thing covering the face, and I'm not even talking about that, but we can if you will. But the most common hijab covering the hair came from the east of Morocco. It started in Egypt with the brother Muslims. So, but it's unknown for us. We've seen that growing, interestingly. Only the head sometimes, all the things are still the same, but covering the hair. The hair is the issue.
Is this an outward appearance of something that's growing in influence or the suppression of women? Is it something that we can see as it comes from the East and would spread throughout the other Middle Eastern?
Well, some of them do it to be safe.
Well,
in different ways. To be safe in complicated neighborhood, to be respected, although I don't believe respect should go through fabric. So sad. Others do it in the belief that maybe they will lose something in their other life if they don't do it. That's what was enforced. Different ways. Wearing hijab can also eliminate social differences.
mm-hmm.
If you are not, able to dress yourself in a certain way, maybe, just hiding everything will be the best way. Different motivations, but the only thing I can say is it's new for us and massive.
Yeah, and don't get locked into a strict interpretation of what you see necessarily. There's all sorts of room for interpretation as to meaning of that. What is the Moroccan influence through the Middle East and particularly Northern Africa in terms of the people influencing the other countries or the movements toward the Islamists? Or is Morocco seen as an influential country, I guess would be?
Probably the food and the architecture is spread everywhere now in the Middle East. I'm not very sure about the political influence Morocco could have. Morocco is a poor country that needs subventions from rich countries of the Middle East. So sometimes you are given, in one hand, tools of development,
Mm-hmm.
and in another hand, ideology.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Go ahead.
I appreciate very much your candor. Thank you for that. And your presentation has been most interesting to me, partly because I have a son who, he is, by the way, slept on the ground in 57 countries. And he's a world traveler. He has a family now that has cut that back, the sleeping on the ground part. But he took his young family, including a toddler, who learned to walk in Morocco and lived there, not in the big cities, and worked there for a time, partly in developmental sorts of things. And his comment about Moroccan people was that he, of all the places he'd been in the world, he had never felt so welcomed. And in fact, he felt loved, he and his family. People would rush over and kiss his children in the middle of the market. And he did not want to leave. Yeah. And didn't leave until his young daughter became ill and they couldn't find medical care that would help. But he loves the people. I would also I'd like to say that that little toddler learning to walk was learning to mimic the call to prayer from the minarets. And I have that on tape, and it's most fascinating to see her with her face up calling the call to prayer. It might be the first time it ever happened by a woman. But at any rate, I'd like to form a question, and it's asked totally out of ignorance, so forgive it if it's not appropriate. But what is the attitude of the people, most likely the young people I'm thinking of, and perhaps the leadership in Morocco, about some other countries very much in the news, such as Iran and Israel? And that of course, is a big issue in that whole part of the world. And I haven't heard you address anything touching those things. If that's an appropriate question, I'd like to ask.
Absolutely. With Iran, actually, there is a tension, and a big one, that when, Iranians were accused to be preaching Shiism in Morocco and spreading their ideology. So actually the embassy is closed. It's in my mother's neighborhood, and I see it all the time. Sadly, it's a beautiful place. With Israel, Morocco has been, first of all, Israel has Moroccan citizens living there. There are Israelis for Israel, and there are Moroccans for Morocco. When you are born Moroccan, you stay Moroccan forever. There is no way you can renounce your citizenship. So we have a big Moroccan diaspora in Israel. And I think it's, some of them go back and forth to their country of origin, and there are lots of links between them and Morocco. Cultural, everything. So in 1974, the King Hassan II was welcoming Shimon Peres for a conference in Ifran that was much criticized by other Arab countries. But Morocco was a champion in linking between different parties like that. So there is no official embassy of Israel in Morocco, but a strong representation and lots of links. Morocco has had a Jewish presence before Islam. Before Arabs invaded Morocco, Jews were present among Berber populations. And they were just Berbers, speaking Berber and worshipping their different god from the Berbers. So this was the first original Jewish population of Morocco. And then in 1492, when the Catholic kings chased non-Christians, non-Catholics, means Isabel de Castilla and Fernando de Aragon, my enemies, because it was the first fascism in Europe. We don't need to forget that. The first time where people were chased because of their beliefs. I mean, chased, tortured, killed, everything. So this population who came from Spain to several places, but especially to Morocco, because it was the closest country, were Jews and Muslims. So added to the original Jewish population in Morocco, a second one from Spain that were added to the original population. Till 1940s, Moroccan Jewish population was about 500,000. So, and then the deal was made, and they started living for Israel or for Canada or for France. A huge Moroccan community, Jewish community in Montreal, with all the traditions of a Moroccan wedding, with all the food you can imagine. You can find anything thanks to them in Montreal. So here is the complex relation, but the very close relation at the same time.
Actually, this is at least part a comment. My wife and I were very fortunate to take a Rhodes Scholar trip that was to Spain and Morocco in 2010 in the fall, and it was a delightful trip, and if any of you have an interest, I would recommend it to you. We were told at the time the king wished to have increased tourism. I assume that is still true. I also found, as the gentleman's son mentioned, the people were very warm and very welcoming. It was quite a joyful experience to visit Morocco. I don't know how old the he has one son or two sons. Do you anticipate that they will succeed the father?
A son and a daughter.
Do you anticipate they will succeed the father? How old are they?
Oh, very young, both
Yeah.
of them, 6, 7.
What would happen
You
to...
know, the monarchy is there since a long, long time.
What would happen? Who would guard the country if, for some reason, the king died or was incapacitated before his children grew up?
He has a brother.
Ah. Does his brother see things similarly?
I don't know him personally.
Yeah. I mean, in the sense, the king's a reformer. Do you believe the brother to be a reformer also?
I believe there is no choice but being a reformer today. You know, I think the brother will be in the same, was brought in the same mold.
When we visited there, we were told that the king was very different, that he presented his wife and children to the public, and this was a complete break with tradition. And he's very much a people person. Thank you.
Thank you.
We've been talking a great deal about the political side. And what I'd like to ask, I would like to ask about the freedoms in the educational side, because that's where the molding begins, when the children are young. And how structured is the educational system? How much freedom do the professors and the teachers have to be able to expand the views of the children, or are they constrained as they are in many of the Middle Eastern countries?
My biggest sadness is about education. You know, several systems are going on in Morocco. People that are fortunate to have money, they send their children to private foreign schools. Very expensive. French, American, and recently, even in Rabat, Spanish schools. This is where people want to go. Very selective, very expensive. Not only expensive, but to go to the French school, you have an exam when you are 4 years old to see if you speak French before going, as if the kids could not. So it's a selective mode that is a little bit corrupted, because if you have good relations, you can get in. The test is just a makeup of something. Anyway, people are desperate to send their kids to good schools. So after the foreign schools, private schools, you have Moroccan private and Moroccan public schools. It is really poorly done. I would say that it followed the format, educational format of the French school in a poor country, which is two bad things. If I had the power, I will start with the school that trains the teachers.
Yes.
I will start that, definitely. Give me a grant, I'll do it now. And I have friends that teach in these schools. And this is the root of the problem, I think. You know, pedagogy, it should be ideology-free, revising the pedagogy, certainly. I go to the high Atlas Mountains in the very remote areas where I took my students last year and the years before. Poor kids. Even about the personal development. It's so no wonder why people cannot have, cannot critique the text and read them and analyze them, etc. It's a very coercive system.
If in fact the teachers were trained, would they have the freedom to teach the way you would like to see them?
I believe so, if the Islamic ideology is kept from this system.
Right. Well, that's where my heart is, so
Yeah,
hopefully,
me too.
hopefully one day we can do something about that.
I would be happy to help.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Here, take this with you.
Yes, for the first time I was forgetting it.
We want to thank you for coming. I want to acknowledge the students here from Tandem and from Miller School of Albemarle. And please fill out your forms, and we look forward to seeing you again next spring. Thank you.